Okay, welcome back to Level 1 NCEA Genetics. In this week's video, I'm going to take a look at the 2011 um, genetics paper. And specific focus of my teaching this week was on the use of Punnett squares to predict the offspring that two parents would essentially get. Remembering that Punnett squares just predict the theoretical probability, which sometimes doesn't match up with the actual outcome that you get when you have two parents mating together. Now, in this case, we're looking at squash plants. So question one. So in 2011, they're looking at the crossing between two squash plants, and with a lot of these exam papers, they can't reproduce the pictures for copyright reasons, so that often happens when you download the exam papers. But the pictures aren't necessary for answering the question. So let's just read the background information for the question first. One trait in squash plants is the color of the fruit. White fruit are due to the dominant allele, which is given a capital F. So there's always a capital letter for the dominant allele. And then yellow fruit are due to a recessive allele, which is a lowercase f. First part of the question is to explain the difference between a gene and an allele. So there are many ways to define these, but a gene I would define as gene. A gene is a section of DNA. So a gene is a section of DNA which codes for one particular trait. So in level 1 science, we just say that one gene codes for one protein or trait. Trait can also be referred to as phenotype. In this case, we're looking at color of fruit. So in this case, fruit color. Then an allele, which is very much related to genes, but an allele is a version of a gene, a version of the gene, and you get one allele from your mom and one from your dad, or in this case, one from each of the parent plants. So that's the idea of alleles. Slightly different base sequence means that you get yellow fruit or white fruit. So you can have the gene for fruit color, and because of a slight variation in the base sequence, you have one allele which results in yellow fruit and one allele which results in white fruit. The next part of the question, part B, the alleles for the color of squash fruit combine to produce 3 different genotypes, but only 2 phenotypes. Explain how the alleles combine to produce only 2 different squash colors, white and yellow. In your answer, you should define genotype and phenotype, and then state 3 different genotypes produced and the phenotype of each. So answering genetics questions are going to be near on impossible if you guys haven't got a good understanding of your key terms. So that's what they're getting you fellas to determine. First of all, can you define genotype and phenotype? And then can you use those definitions to answer the second part of the question? So definition for genotype and phenotype, and the actual 3 genotypes that you can have. The question is laid that out on the next page, so we'll just go here first of all. So the genotypes are, if you go back to the start of the question, because you need to take a look at this, so we're just going to scroll back up here, get to the start of this question. So at the beginning of the question, they said that the alleles for the color of squash fruit combine to give you 3 different genotypes. Now, before that, when we wrote our definitions for allele and gene, they also told us that the fruit, white fruit, are dominant allele and yellow fruit are recessive allele. So this is the key to unlocking the answer to this question. So that's really important, that statement right there. So what we can say from this is, if the dominant allele is capital F, then the possible genotypes for white fruit would be capital F, that will give a phenotype of white fruit. But similarly, capital F and small f will also give a phenotype which looks like white fruit. So the only way you can have yellow fruit with a recessive allele is to have 2 of the small f, so 2 of the small f alleles, and this would give you yellow fruit. Now, this is a common recurring theme with these allele questions in level 1 science. They always ask, or they tend to always ask, about the origin of recessive traits throughout generations. So if I go back now to my setup right here, so the 3 possible genotypes are just laid out nicely in these big boxes. So they were capital F, capital F, capital F, small f, and small f, small f. And remember, these letters are just arbitrary, or we're just using these letters to represent particular genotypes and phenotypes. The phenotype with large F, we just said was white fruit. With large F, small f, it's also white fruit. And with small f, it's yellow fruit. There's another way to describe these particular genotypes here. This would be described as being homozygous dominant, because both of the letters are the same, so that's what the homozygous means. Heterozygous means that the 2 letters are different, but it's still a dominant situation. So this is heterozygous dominant, and then this is homozygous recessive for a genotype like that. So then they ask us for a definition of a genotype. So genotype is the combination of alleles, always 2 letters. So it's always 2 letters for the sake of level 1 science. And then phenotype is how a trait appears as a result of a genotype. So in our example we're taking here, for example, the genotype would be large F, small f. That's the genotype. And then the phenotype would be white fruit. So genotype, large F, small f, phenotype, white fruit. Okay, and then we continue with the exam questions, see what else they can ask us in these things. There are only 2 different colors of squash fruit, because the large F allele is dominant over the small f allele, the recessive one. So as long as the F allele, the dominant allele, is present in the genotype, so you can have, in that case, large F, or large F, small f, comma, the fruit of the plant will be white. And therefore, the only other color possible is yellow, and that's with the only other genotype, which was small f, small f. So that's why you can only have 2 colors of white or yellow, and that's why there are only 2 different colors of squash fruit. If we continue with the question, so that was question 1 from the 2011 genetics paper. So now we're looking at question 2, and this one is called aping around, because they're talking about apes. In this particular case, they're talking about gorillas specifically. And again, the pictures, first of all, you can't see them because of copyright issues, so the pictures aren't there. You can look up those 2 pictures on the internet if you want to look at what an albino gorilla looks like. But everything's described here in words. Now, this is all about pedigree charts, which I'm actually going to teach next week in class. But pedigree charts are a great way of tracing the inheritance of particular traits throughout more than 1 generation. So you can see here you have your 1st generation, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generation. So this pedigree chart shows 4 different generations. With pedigree charts as well, and they're explaining it to you here, the key is that a box always represents a male and a circle always represents a female. And then you want to look at the particular trait that they're talking about. So the trait that they're interested in this particular question is described up here, so we better read what it says at the beginning. So gorillas show an inherited recessive condition called albinism. So straight away you can say that there's going to be 2 small letters must be necessary in order to get albinism. So the genotype must have 2 small letters if you're going to get the phenotype albinism. This results in white fur. So this is how the actual genotype presents itself in terms of appearance. So phenotype would be albinism or white fur. The pedigree chart below shows the inheritance of albinism in a family of gorillas. Normal fur is the dominant allele, capital N, and albino fur is recessive, small n. So straight away you can develop your little key and you can say large N, small n, or large N is going to give you normal fur, which in a gorilla would probably be just a dark black fur. And then small n, because it's a recessive condition, the genotype must be 2 small letters, will be white fur or albinism. So that's your little key. And then we look at how this is illustrated in the pedigree chart. So in the pedigree chart, an ape or gorilla with normal fur is going to be a black box and a female will be a black circle, whereas an ape which is albino will have a white box or a white circle if it's female. Then you look at the generations and you can see, well, you have a black ape and a white female ape or albino ape, and then you get 1, 2 sons and a daughter, if you can call them that with gorillas. But you get, so there's 3 albino offspring right there, and then you get just 1 with black fur. So that doesn't suggest that it's recessive yet. But if you look at the next generation, you have again an albino female and a black furred male, and they again have 1 albino. Well, in this case, they have 1 albino male and then 2 normal furred females. So again, you can't talk about recessiveness there. But if you focus on this last generation, where both of them have normal fur, but then a 1 in 4 chance of getting an albino offspring, well, this is where you can see evidence of this trait being recessive. So let's actually look at what the question asks us now. So if we scroll on to the question, the question says, explain how the pedigree chart can be used to show that albinism is a recessive trait. And in your answer, you should define the terms dominant and recessive. Second bullet point, state the genotypes of albino and normal gorillas. Number 3, complete a labeled Punnet square to support your answer. And number 4, explain how your Punnet square shows that albinism is a recessive trait. And then you're supposed to refer to the pedigree chart, which you've just been looking at. So again, because this exam question has laid everything out as bullet points, you should make it easy for the examiner and answer your answer using bullet points as well. So the first thing here is to define the terms dominant and recessive. Dominant trait, in short, dominant trait is always expressed as long as the dominant allele is present. And we can talk about the genotypes. This example is very like the squash plants in the previous example. So in this case, large N, small n, or large N, where this is the heterozygous condition, heterozygous dominant, or homozygous dominant. In any case, the phenotype is going to be normal fur, so dark fur. So the point here with the definition of a dominant allele is that as long as you have just one of them, you will get expression. Okay, so that's dominant. Now with recessive, if we were to define recessiveness, in order for a recessive allele to be expressed in the phenotype, you must have 2 of the recessive alleles in the genotype. The exact same concept which we were being assessed on in the first question. So in this case, we're looking for small n, which will give you albinism. So that's what I would use for defining the terms dominant and recessive. they try not to use the term dominant being the strongest feature. So they just want you to talk about expression in this case. Next thing is state the genotypes of albino and normal gorillas. Well, we've done that already. We said albino is going to be small n, and normal gorillas are going to be either large n, small n, or large n, large n. So that's pretty easy. The next thing was complete a label Punnett square to support your answer. So the answer to this question really is you're trying to use genotypes to explain why albinism is a recessive trait. And at the bottom of this exam paper, if I go to the next page, no, not yet. So I'll just scroll down here. They have laid out a little place for a Punnett square for you guys. So you have a Punnett square right here. And we've just been saying that in order for a recessive trait to appear from two parents, well, both parents must be carriers. So if the male genotype, so if this is the male genotype has to be large n, small n, and the female genotype has to be large n, small n. If through meiosis they produce, the male produces sperm cells, one of the sperm cells could carry the large n allele, and the other sperm cell could carry the small n allele. And the same case in a female, large n in one of the eggs and small n in one of the other eggs. So what we describe this male genotype is this male could be described as being a carrier. So a carrier is anytime you have the heterozygous dominance, anytime you have that condition, that person or organism can be described as being a carrier of the recessive allele right there. And the same thing here, this female genotype is also a carrier as well. So you need two carriers to mate in order for a recessive trait to reappear in the next generation. So if you combine these alleles right here, you end up with large n, and then large n, small n here. Down here we have large n, small n, and we have small n, small n. A couple of you guys were asking me in class, can you write small n, large n? And the convention is that you always put the dominant allele first for obvious reasons. And that's just the convention. So always write the biggest letter first if you have a choice. And then you can see here, classic, it's the same as we had with the squash plants. There's a 1 in 4 chance of having an albino gorilla in this case. So that's a 25% chance. And this is always the percentage chance for recessive traits reappearing in a generation. It's probability, that's the theory, but in reality, sometimes that doesn't work out that way. Like we can see, if we go back to our pedigree chart now, and I want to identify this male and this female. So I go back up to our pedigree chart. I'm getting on the right page here. So we scroll on down a little bit. Okay, so in the pedigree chart, the first generation, we didn't actually see any evidence of albinism being recessive because we had 3 children right here and only one of them was normal. So that would suggest that albinism is dominant. We look at the next generation from generation 2 where these 2 parents mate together. We have some evidence of albinism, but the parent was albino herself. So the only real generation which shows evidence of albinism being recessive is when we take generation 3 here. And these would have been the 2 parents, that's the female and that's the male. These would have been the 2 parents which I presented in the Punnett square. So if I redraw the Punnett square briefly, I said the female was, we put the female down here, we put the male up here. So let's just put the male up here. We said both of them were carriers. So we said large n, small n. And then large n, small n. And then we said, well, the offspring could be large n, then we could have large n, small n, and small n, small n. Now we know one of the offspring is small n, because this is an albino gorilla right here. The identity of these other 3, and this is the last part of this question, I'll just read it out for you guys. Part B to this question says, explain why the genotype of the 3 normal 4 offspring in generation 4, so these 3 right here, cannot be determined based on the evidence in the pedigree chart in your Punnett square. So if we look at our Punnett square, we just get some highlighter here. We know that this male here is albino because they have to be small n, so we're definite of the genotype there. We know the phenotypes of these other 3 offspring would be normal or dark hair. But in terms of the genotypes, they could be either large N, or they could be large N, small n. So the only way to determine what the actual genotype is would be for them to go on and mate with another gorilla, and then look at the next generation that follows to provide evidence of what the actual genotypes were of the parents. So that's 20 minutes on question 1 and question 2 from the 2011 paper. That is as much as I will be doing on the level 1 genetics topics for this year. And I may do another video on answering other exam questions, but at this stage we've covered all the content. So that was the linking pedigree charts to Punnett squares and the idea of recessive genotypes reappearing in another generation.